Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and it is 3:57 a.m.
Oh God, I feel so guilty.
And I am here continuing my
Oh my God, your body, you're exhausted. Oh my God.
I'm fine. I am here continuing my conversation with the one and only, absolutely hilarious and adorable Joy Usher. Joy, we're doing it.
Okay, cool, Mychal. Excellent. It's 5:28 p.m. here in Adelaide, so hey, I've got all night. So.
Oh boy. All right, Joy. So, on our last episode of the True Divination podcast together, you and I, we spoke deeply about many issues that impact both traditional astrology as well as modern astrology. And one of the very profound pieces that you brought up was that our astrology is really an interface between heaven and earth. And the topic that we're going to speak about this evening is a part of our chart that is essentially that same interface between heaven and earth, which is the ascendant. So in a sense, when I think about it, I think about the Indian conception of the ascendant, where they call it the lagna, or that which binds the soul, or that which ties the soul to matter, essentially. So the ascendant is really this point of where the soul and matter become one in this human vehicle of the body. And I think that that's what we're going to be speaking about right now. And I'm really excited to talk about that. And I know that you're excited to talk about it. So let's talk about it. Joy, what is the ascendant?
Thank you, Mychal. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present this, because it's a little bit further on from Companion, which I start talking about this, but I've actually, this is actually new work, so it's nice to have the opportunity to do that. So it's a continuation. First of all, beautiful description of the ascendant, absolutely stunning. And we must be in sync, because I've actually called this where heaven meets earth, because this is literally what this is. So two things I want to talk about is the whole concept of the light of the ascendant. That's one thing. And the other thing is to address this idea of aversion. The idea of aversion is the idea of blindness, the inability to act or react in time. And this has to do with the planet that rules the houses. I must thank Benjamin Dykes for drawing my attention to this whole idea of aversion. This was several years ago when he was, I think, at a conference in Australia. And it was the first time that I'd really heard this term, or really, sort of thought of this idea. And it was only when I went back and looked at texts and, sort of started to see it come through. It's very obvious in Paulus's Alexandrina. It talks about aversion. It comes through in Alberuni, and it's sort of one of these things that is critical and has kind of been lost along the way. So, one of my things I feel very strongly driven to do is to bring back this idea of aversion and to, incorporate it into our natural practices. On a personal level, the disease of glaucoma is something that, sort of destroyed my mother's sight for the last 10 years of her life, and destroyed many, the sight of, of her family members. So it's something which is, obviously a hereditary thing that is possibly something that I might have to deal with later on in life. So, blindness is something that to me is very personal and sort of, as you find with anything that sort of tips over from the personal to the astrological studies, that it's something that you absolutely grab onto and you want to find out more about, and you want to sort of research it. So with that in mind, that's what I want to run you through, is just a PDF file. I haven't prepared a PowerPoint or anything like that, but perhaps if I can sort of share these things or these images and these ideas with you, that's where we want to go from there. So, okay, this is just a number of pages talking about this concept of the ascendant, and particularly looking at signs on the ascendant and what gets them into trouble, what gets their Lord into trouble. Just starting with the whole Bonatti idea of, this is a quote from him, as you can read for yourself, you know, the whole idea that the first house signifies life, the body of any particular native or querent. And of course, Mychal, for you as a horary astrologer, this is a principle that you will absolutely be familiar with, but has a huge impact on any horary question of, you know, does the Lord of the Ascendant, you know, see the Ascendant? Will affect hugely the outcome of your question. So this doesn't just work for natal charts, it also works for horary as well. So the beginning of any work and every election, every beginning, and it signifies the beginning of life of any nativity. So that's the first statement that Bonatti makes. He then goes on to say, this house comes from the hidden to the light, and from parts occult to those manifest. So he who is born goes forth from the darkness and confined belly of his mother and reaches the light of his age and the breadth of the air, which I think is a beautiful analogy for that whole kind of coming out of a dark place and the light of the ascendant. And as you say quite beautifully, the connection of the divine, which is the soul, to the matter, to the physical body. And one of the things that Bonatti does that he talks about is he relates each of the houses as being a planet that is a co-significator for the houses. I don't know if you've looked at this, but
yes.
It starts with Saturn. Yeah, beautiful Chaldean order, isn't it? And it's quite right that Saturn is a co-significator for the first house, because and Bernadette Brady used to have a lovely term for this. She'd say, we're all coffins on legs, you know? Which is just a beautiful whole idea that from the moment of birth, we are working towards the moment of death. The Chaldean order relates the planets from Saturn for the first to Jupiter for the second, Mars is the co-significator of the third, etc., etc., the Sun for the fourth because it's the father, Venus for the fifth because it's the house of pleasures, Mercury for the sixth because it's a mercantile, hard-working house, and the Moon for the seventh house because it's the house of relationship and love and all things lunar. He then starts, and again, Bonatti does this and Shona does it later, and he says that Saturn is the co-significator for the eighth because it's the house of death. So there's a lovely correlation between Saturn being the house of life in the first house and then the eighth house, which is the house of death. You know, the whole sense of time is moving all the time, and Saturn is the lord of time. Jupiter as the co-significator for the ninth because it's the house of God, the Sun for the 10th because it's the house of glory and recognition of glory, around to Mars is connected to the 10th house because the 10th house is competition with others. In the Chaldean order, we would have Saturn as the first, Jupiter have Mars, so that's why the 10th house connection to Mars. And then we have the Sun that's connected to the 11th house, you know, the house of hopes and dreams and my daemon and all those sorts of things. The Sun is the co-significator. And then I love the fact that Bonatti says that Venus is the co-significator for the 12th house. And you think, well, you know, Venus is such a lovely planet, and it's, you know, it's light and it's sociable and it's love and it's all the sorts of things. But he then goes on to say, because it's our pleasures which are our undoing. So I think that's a beautiful way to sort of look at, you know, the 12 houses through their co-significators.
Another point that I think is interesting for our listeners to know, Joy, is that this also represents the 9 months of pregnancy that a woman goes through and the various developmental stages that a child goes through each of those months, from Saturn being the first month to Jupiter being the second month, going all the way around to Jupiter being the 9th month of pregnancy, where that child is born as an independent being from its mother. And I just find that completely beautiful.
It's gorgeous. It's in Omar of Tiberius. He talks about this, and absolutely the cold seed of Saturn is the first one, and then it moves to the second month, which is that life, you know, starts to stir with Jupiter. and the blood comes in at Mars, and etc., etc. But it's a lovely concept, and absolutely right that you want to go all through these 9 months, but you certainly the month you need to be the most aware of is the second month of Saturn. And that's when you may lose the child. It's a beautiful kind of idea of, and it correlates with this lovely descent of the soul stuff, the whole sense of soul, passing from Saturn to Jupiter to Mars to the Sun, etc., 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 and picking up the qualities or the essences of the planets as the soul descends. It's just, I think the first time I heard the descent of the soul and Aristotle's interpretation, or Plato probably is a better resource, but just thinking, it doesn't matter whether this is true or not. This resounds so strongly for me that it makes so much sense. It doesn't have to be true or the right thing or irrefutable. The reasoning behind it was so incredibly crystal clear for me that I just loved it. And I think that they are very, very critical, the order of the planets under the Chaldean order.
And another piece in terms of the descent of the soul, just because you mentioned it in our last podcast together, is that this concept also comes up within the Corpus Hermeticum, in which Hermes is essentially talking about how the soul steps forward into life not as an outcast, but as a voyager. And the soul willingly voyages down through the stellar shells, down through the shell of Saturn where he picks up prudence, and down through the shell of Jupiter where he picks up temperance. And the soul essentially comes down through the 7 shells, and it becomes burdened in a sense with this astral materiality. And then when it steps off of the lunar shell and steps into matter, it becomes burdened with the actual material body, which is the human body itself. And that as the soul makes its way back up through the stellar shells, back towards the divinity that it came from, it gives back to Caesar what is Caesar's. So as it passes back through the moon, it gives the moon back its cloak. As it passes through Mercury, it gives Mercury its cloak, until it completely unburdens itself in the process of divine reintegration.
And it's a cleansing process. The ascent of the soul is a cleansing process because it gives back, almost the tarnished qualities that it's learned here on Earth, and in order to, gain more light and more lightness and more brilliance, it's actually getting rid of the dross, all the accumulated things that it's collected here on Earth. It's a beautiful cleansing principle, isn't it? I don't know whether your listeners are aware, but the whole 7 deadly sins and 7 virtues. They're Aquinas. Aquinas was St. Thomas Aquinas was he was an Aristotelian, and he was trying to match this whole descent of the soul, and even all of the lectures that Plato does. That Socrates talked about goodness, and he talked about excess, and he talked about not enough, and the golden mean of the virtue between the two, the excess and the limitations. So all these virtues that the 7 virtues of the Catholic Church are given to each one of these planets. I'm sorry, but and I think I think it was John Frawley that talked about how embedded in astrology the Catholic Church is. But yes, that is just 7. It's not a coincidence that each one of these beautiful golden means, these beautiful virtues that Plato talked about, Socrates talking about, they're absolutely embedded in Catholic law. I always find it very amusing, when you kind of go, oh no, astrology's got nothing to do. Come on, it's still there.
No.
Vatican is full of astrology books, I'm sure of it.
Now, a final piece that I want to touch on, Joy, and we're going to get back to the Ascendant, and we're going to stay there, is the fact that if we use this Chaldean order through the 12 houses, what we find is something very peculiar that happens with the second house and the eighth house. Now, in Deb Holdings' book, Temples in the Sky, her book on the houses, she essentially speaks about how the eighth house is epicatophora, or the entrance into the gates of Hades, and how the second house is anaphora, or the exit of the gates of Hades. And John Gadbury in the 17th century says that, and the second house is called the exit from Hades because anything that is within the second house has within it the promise of rising towards the horizon. So there is a promise attached to the second house that if you're there, you're going to be rising towards the horizon and essentially leaving darkness, which is what we see Bonatti saying. And that is a Jupiterian process, that growth process, that departure process, and it's fundamentally also a benefic process. Whereas we find that the eighth house, having Saturn there by Chaldean order, is a death process. So it makes complete sense that the house of wealth, personal wealth, of the second house would be associated with Jupiter in the Chaldean order, and the house of debt as well as death would be associated with Saturn in the Chaldean order in the 12 houses.
You know, Mychal, I've never thought of that before. That is brilliant. That is so clever. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I naturally, because there's no light to the second house, I tend to view the second house as quite a dark house, you know, because there's no Ptolemaic aspect to it. You know, it's in the sign next to the ascendant. You know, it is a cumbersome thing for the soul to understand. And obviously Jupiter ruling wealth is the connection that I've always put in there. But I really like the idea of it being the idea of, okay, it is darkness. There's no promise that you're going to reach the ascendant, but that there is hope. And I, you know, like, I thank you for that. That's a really, that's a poetic way of seeing it. I love that. That's beautiful. All right. Okay, let's go back to basics. Okay. The Ptolemaic aspects are the aspects that link like with like, okay? So the whole idea of whatever sign is on the ascendant will have a gender compatibility to whatever is the third. Now, in this model, I am talking about whole sign. And I think, you know, we're not going to go into whole sign Placidus or whole sign, you know, Regimentanus or whatever. But I always put the two charts side by side because I like to use Placidus, and or any of the quadrant style house systems are easy to convert to whole sign, but I can't go back the other way. Okay, so I prefer not to just work wholly in whole sign. I will work with them side by side.
You are my favorite person in the world at this moment.
Oh, okay. It's not because it's 4:30 in the morning, is it, Mychal?
No.
And I'm the only person at the moment.
I do the exact same thing, and you know, at one level I do it in my mind, so I see the whole sign placements for everything, but I think that there's also something very important about seeing those two charts side by side, the quadrant house chart as well as the whole sign houses chart, because when you see it, you know, I'm a very visual person, you're a very visual person. When we actually see these things, the symbolic relationship between sight and meaning takes on a whole new flavor, because then it allows you to have something to sink your teeth into. So yes, I completely agree with you. I look at the two charts side by side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, if push came to shove and someone said, why do you do it? I would say it's because Placidus or any quadrant system, I don't really mind which one you're using, but it shows you the messiness of what our planet is. It shows you the differences in season. It shows you, you know, the tilt of the Earth's axis at 23.5 degrees. It shows you the fact that some signs are signs of long ascension, and they are opposite according to whether they're southern hemisphere or northern hemisphere. You know, we live in a faulty, flawed environment. And that's what a quadrant tells you. It's messy when a planet in one sign sits in a house where the cusp is a different sign. It's messy when you have intercepted signs. It's messy when you don't have a clear cross of matter and you've got disassociate. It is the realization of this messiness that I use the quadrant for. That I want to know, and if I put it really simply, I would say that a whole sign chart is what the planets want for me. That's what they want to achieve for me. I'm messing around, paddling around in the pool of the Placidus, whereas when I look at the whole sign, I get the idea of, if a planet moves from succedent to angular, which is certainly possible to move from third to fourth or ninth to 10th, if it moves backwards from angular, what looks to be angular and goes, or looks to be succedent and goes into cadency, then I know that this planet is not meant to be seen and it's not going to work well, and it's, and I'm going to struggle with it, and I'm going to fight, I'm going to fight with God, or whatever that prime mover is, and say, I want it to be this, and it's going to say, I'm sorry, but it's this, learn to live with it. So the movement is so beautiful and so illuminating when you see movement from quadrant style to whole sign. So to just look at whole sign is not enough. Look at Placidus or quadrant style is not enough. They lie side by side on your astrologer's desk. And believe me, students say, well, how can I look at both? Honestly, within a couple of months of them doing it, they would not consider doing anything else. It's like learning, your piano notes on the clarity it gives you. I can't talk enough about. So one is not exclusive to the other.
Joy Usher, first of all, the pool of Placidus sounds like a disease.
I know, you'd be surprised what you can pick up there, Mychal. It's not nice.
I'm swimming in the pool of Placidus.
You're swimming in the pool of Placidus. Absolutely.
So one, that sounds like something that belongs in my colon. But then the second thing, the second thing that I think is really important, Joy, is the fact that you speak about the messiness of life and how the quadrant house system, whichever one you choose to use, I personally choose to use Regiomontanus just because I'm a 17th century reincarnation of someone. So I use Regiomontanus, but I think what a lot of people, and especially younger astrologers coming into astrology, they don't seem to realize that whole sign houses, it is a symbolic representation of a chart, whereas the quadrant house system is more of a literal representation of where were these planets in their diurnal motion on the day of this chart being cast. And so I love the imagery of you saying that the quadrant house system shows the messiness, and in a sense it shows a personal reality, whereas the whole sign house system, it shows the actual objective reality. If we could see our lives from the perspective of those planets themselves, where those planets would symbolically want to be, that would be the whole sign house system, whereas the messiness of daily life is reflected more so through our quadrant house, whichever one we're using.
Absolutely. Can I scrabble around for just a second? I found a beautiful quote that I really find, that I really loved. The author of this is Command Kajuri, and they say, okay, this is what they say. Last night I spoke to God. I told him my plans, and he started to cry. I thought I was great to move the greatest to tears. He said that he was crying only because my plans were very different from his plans for me. Isn't that beautiful? I just thought, while we're busy trying to get our plans made, this whole idea of, making the gods weep, because we're trying to make something happen that is never meant to manifest.
Yes.
I just think it's a beautiful quote. So yes, thank you for allowing me to do that. Okay, so the Ptolemaic aspects are going to link something of likeness. Okay, so it will either be gender, or it will be modality, as you'll get with the 1st and the 4th and the 1st and the 10th. Again, element between the sign which is on the 1st and the 5th, and the sign which is on the 1st and the 9th. And then you have the opposition to the 7th house. So these are all either aspects of tension, which is shown by the red, which is the opposition, or the square here. By the way, I love to say to people that you know, here's me as the 1st house, and I think I have a lovely trine relationship with my children, and I'm lots of fun and great to be with. And I have to remember that they actually have a square aspect to me. You know, I'm not as much fun as I think I am. You know, it's that big generational gap thing. You know, they might be my trine, but I am their square. But yeah, so you have this sort of natural, this light, this distribution of light, even if it's difficult, and even if there's tension between the 1st and the 7th sign, or the 1st and the 4th, or the 1st and the 10th, you've at least got connection. These are the signs, and these are the houses where there's no connection, and these are why they're called dark houses or dark signs or whatever. So there's no connection between the 1st and the 2nd. There's no connection or no aspect between. And if you put any sign on this level of the 1st, you're not going to find a connection to the 6th sign, to the 8th sign, to the 12th or the 2nd sign. So for that reason, they are dark houses. And sometimes they're irksome, and sometimes they're downright dangerous. I mean, you can understand, you know, the chaos of the 8th house and the house of endings and death and, you know, all those sorts of things. You know, you can understand the 6th house, which is the house of unknown illness or injury or workloads or slavery or all those sorts of things. You know, personal commitment to those things is the 6th. You can understand the 12th house, which is, you know, imprisonment, which is the house of my hidden enemy, which is my house of sorrows and woes, as Bernati calls it, all those sorts of things. So these are house interpretations that are very easy to understand. And as you said before, the 8th house is, you know, the first gate of hell, as the luminary and the sun is descending into the underworld. And this is the other gate of hell as it's coming out of it. And some people will sort of say to me, look, you know, why is the 2nd house, you know, this is my house of wealth, this is my house of resources, this is my house of, you know, these are not dark things for me. These are things that, you know, where it's a materialistic world. And I do agree with them. But I have to keep reminding them that the 1st house is the contract between soul and matter, and the contract of the soul to come here for whatever time is allotted to it, to achieve the things that soul has to do. So the 2nd house is extremely irksome for the 1st house because the soul doesn't understand that you've got to feed your body, and you've got to put a roof over its head, and you've got to pay your bills, and it doesn't understand why you have to stop and do these things when all it wants to do is to get on with its purpose. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And now another piece about that 2nd house is that one of the names of it is the Gates of Pluto, and not necessarily Pluto in the modern sense, but Pluto in the classical sense. The point of all of this is that Pluto was seen as being the infernal Zeus, or the Zeus of the underworld, which I think is another important piece in terms of putting Jupiter here in the 2nd house, because Jupiter is the Greek equivalent of Zeus. So Pluto being the infernal Zeus, having, is in a sense, rulership over the 2nd house, symbolically says to us that, you know, what else was in the underworld? It wasn't just the souls of the dead, but also all of the material wealth of the earth. The mineral wealth of the earth, the gems, the crystals, the precious metals are in the earth, which is the 2nd house. And farmers in antiquity would pray to Hades, i.e. Pluto, for their crops to grow. Because out of the darkness of the earth grows our nutriment, which is why the 2nd house is also considered to be a house of food.
It's a lovely and look, one of the things that I really get worked up about is the concept, and we talked a little bit the first time we spoke about this connection between Taurus and the second house, and that in a lot of the more modern texts, it will talk about the fact that the second house is about self-esteem and self-value. I just have to grind my teeth about that. I'm thinking, do I want a dark house to talk about how I value myself? Are you actually saying if I have this much money that I'm more valuable? Is this what you're saying to me? So, I really have to sort of say, back away from that, please, because the second house is purely, as you say, materialistic. It's purely about money in, money out. If I was going to talk about what I valued about myself, I would not go to a house. I would go to the 7 planets. And I would say, my sun values this about me, my honors, my pride, my reputation, my rises, my successes. My moon values my ability to nurture and love. Every planet gives me a different sense of self-value. Don't, please, attach a house which is dark in the first place to the concept of these are my self-values, my self-worth. So yes, that's that's a biggie. By now I'm sure every modern astrologer hates my guts, but never mind, it's what it is. Okay, one of the things I wanted to just bring in this here very, very quickly, Robert Hand did a lecture in York in 2005 at a conference in York in the UK. It was entitled On Matter and Form. It was written down, the basics of it was written down, and someone translated this, and you can find this essay on ARHAT website or the NCGR Turkey website. And it's 13 pages long, it's very dense. You have to go through it like it is a traditional text, and you have to pull it apart and, sort of chew it over and digest it and do the rest of it. But so I've just taken a little bit out of this because it actually has a lot to do with both the Ascendant and all the houses. And he says, okay, one of the most important questions that is asked in the difference between modern and traditional astrology is, what is the difference between a planet being in a house and a planet ruling a house? And this is what he writes about it and what he said at this lecture, okay? In 20th century astrology, little or no distinction has been made between a planet being in a house and a planet ruling a house. And many astrologers believe that a planet in a house is more powerful for the affairs of that house than the condition of the ruler. Okay, now this isn't just a modern context. I found that rereading my notes actually just yesterday from that, Robert Zola's medieval course, is that at the time that he did that course in 1995, I think he had the medieval course, which was a series of cassettes, and he actually does talk about the importance that he thinks that the position is very important. Now, I don't know whether he changed his opinion over the following, 25 or 30 years, but I found it interesting that he said position was important. I wonder whether he would have said the same thing had we, talked to him about it 20 years later. Definitely Rob Hand is saying that actually, the condition of the ruler is incredibly important. And then he goes on to talk about horary astrology and says that traditional horary astrology reverses this, and that the condition of the ruler, and you know yourself, Mychal, with all your horary work, that you're going to look at the condition of the ruler of the house and use secondarily a planet that's located in that house. You're looking to see any connection between the house of the querent and the house of the thing that you're asking about. So the condition of the ruler is incredibly important. So this whole idea of, in horary astrology, the perfection, the resolution of the matter is most completely symbolized by the actions of the ruler as the house involved, not the occupants. The occupants may make good aspects to each other, but it's a second-hand indicator of success, and it's not completely worthless. So he's saying that one of the great differences between traditional and modern astrology is that greater attention is given to the ruler of the houses rather than to the occupants. And we talked a little bit about that in the previous session that we talked about, this idea of house rulership. So with that in mind, what I have done is looked at the whole idea of what the ascendant is really. The two questions that I'm looking for when I look at the ascendant is, what does the world expect from me? In other words, how are they going to judge me? How do they see me physically? How do they see my performance? How do they see both, that the ascendant will describe my physical state, but it will also describe on some level a temperament or a behavior or a personality or whatever you want to call it. That's what the world expects from me, to conform to this impression of what this sign is on the cusp of that ascendant. Or, even planets which sit next to the ascendant, particularly if they conjunct the ascendant, then the world is going to pick that up as an expectation of what they perceive me to be. So we have one idea of what the world sees from me, and the other one is, what do I want from the world? So there's sort of two, we often think of the seventh house as a house of contract. The house of contract with another person, whether it's professional, whether it's client, whether it's emotional, whether it's personal. We consider the seventh house as the house of contract in both, natal astrology and in horary astrology. But the first contract I make is with the divine, and that's the ascendant. That's my first contract. That's the contract I cannot break. That's the contract that I must always follow through with. And Robert Zoller called this something. He called it primary motivation. He said that Zoltan Mason first came up with the term. I believe that was his teacher or someone he was connected with.
One moment. Zoltan Mason, astrosynthesis. Oh my goodness.
I don't have it in my library, Mychal.
Listen.
Is it a good book?
It is a wonderful... Okay, so this book, Astrosynthesis, is essentially book 21 of Marinus. And so if you purchased James Herschel Holden's translation of book 21 of Marinus, it would essentially be the same book. And let me just grab that as well.
Okay. I've got one of his translations, but I can't think which one it is.
So this is book 21 by James Herschel Holden of Marinus, and so you could completely buy this and it would be the exact same book. However, and I mean, I love the ground James Herschel Holden walks on, but however, Astrosynthesis by Zoltan Mason, I personally find it to be more readable. And I mean, that's just me. Probably I don't like the paper or something. But anyway, the point is, it's a wonderful book. And as you're talking about this, I realize that there is so much of the philosophy of Marinus in what you're saying that it's really beautiful. The difference, I think, for me would be that I tend to go in the middle, whereas I see the planets in the houses as being probably our first experience of those houses. But at the end of the day, the natal promise of that house is always going to be fulfilled by the ruler of that house. So I tend to view it in like a two-tier system, whereas my immediate experience of my second house is that I have Saturn in Leo in my second house. But my ultimate...
Oh, no.
Oh, God, not me.
Oh, sorry.
I'm not that person. But... No, my Saturn is quite in Aquarius in my second house. My Saturn is doing wonderfully fine there. But
sorry.
But in terms of this, I get this from Marinus, but I also get this from a couple of other classical sources, that the planet in the house is going to be your immediate experience of that house, whereas the ruler of that house is going to be the ultimate destiny of that house, if you will. Do you think that that fits within your framework, or how do you think that works, this concept of planets in houses and integrating the ruler of the house?
Yeah. Again, I'm going to refer to Robert Hand's article on matter and form, because yeah, he talks about this too. But if I understand his interpretation, and if I don't, I apologise to Robert. But almost the sense of there is a certain level of what I would call a timeline. Okay. So if I see a planet in a house, I know it's going to instigate and it's going to start, whatever the issue is. But I know that the outcome will be produced by the ruler of that house in another place. This is what makes, and it's part of the whole, in a way. I know that we often talk about essential dignities, and we talk about planets in rulership. And we talk about, sort of if Saturn's in Aquarius, or, like for yourself or whatever, or it's not just the fact that we have a Saturn that is willing to produce its best essence, okay, in Aquarius, but we have this planet which is all over its house. So not only is it the instigator in that house, it's also the finisher. There is no dispositor here. It is purely there. And it's why the ancients, I think, talked about it being like a king in his kingship. The idea of it is placed in situ. It is both the instigator or the aggravator, but it's also the one who sees it through to the end. And I think that's a huge thing for a planet in rulership. So yeah, this is sort of where that comes in. I need to apologize to all those who are devotees of Marinus. I've not read him. He's too modern for me. So gosh, I'm going to be in trouble. I did notice some quotes in your comments to your your previous interviews, and I thought, oh, am I going to admit I haven't even read Marinus? So it's out there. I'm sorry, everybody.
We are now in the hour of confession, so get it all out there. But honestly, in terms of Marinus, I love what he does in terms of chart delineation. What I don't like is what he does in terms of essential dignity. I think that is my one bone of contention with Marinus. But I completely love his approach and his system of chart delineation, because if you follow his system of chart delineation, you'll be a great astrologer, in my opinion. I'm not saying that he's the only system, but it's a really, really beautiful outline that he laid out. I was speaking with Stephen Birchfield, another great astrologer from Robert Zoller, and Stephen was pretty much saying that the reason why Marinus's approach to chart delineation is such a good approach is because it's not something that he himself invented. Marinus is essentially pulling from all of the classical sources and working them into a clean, workable system. But his concepts of planets in houses and planets that rule those houses is essentially coming from our classical literature as well.
Yeah. I know that there's a really beautiful, and I can't think, I don't know which period he has, but he's an Arabic astrologer called Al-Khayat, and Al-Khayat, and I think the translation is the same translator as you just gave me then for Marinus.
James Herschel Holden?
Yes, that's it. Yes, James Herschel Holden. And Al-Khayat has this beautiful delineation process, almost like one after the other, do this, do this, do this, do this, and so obviously, and I think, maybe this has been something astrologers forever have grappled with, is how do we delineate? How do we synthesize all this information? So when you read these sort of things, whether it's Al-Khayat or it's Marinus, it's like we are constantly trying to work through how to improve the way in which we give this information to people who know nothing about us, who know nothing about the skills that we have or the things that we do, especially, I suppose, in our modern day where we are chock-a-block full of sun sign astrology, where whenever I, you look at anything to do with the signs, it's always giving me a date of, this is Capricorn, this is Aquarius, this is, without the absolute knowledge that the moon can be in Aquarius and the, Venus can be in Aries, and, so, maybe they had to contest with the same things, and they had to go through the process of how do we delineate a chart, and this kind of idea, bringing it back to this whole idea of the primary motivation, is in a way, looking at, okay, how do we go into this chart? Do we work out what the contract is between, the soul and the time on earth, and work out, how it is that we can motivate, and then does the rest of the chart support this primary motivation? So, if the fire ascendant, if you've got either Aries, or you've got Leo, or you've got Sag on the ascendant, and the planet ruling that is absolutely messed up, then you need to be, if it's Leo and the sun is, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, it's in aversion to Leo rising, then what other planets, what other things are giving you fire? What's Mars doing in the chart? What are the other fiery things in here? What's in other fiery capacities to give you a help with this fire ascendant, or particularly an air ascendant, if you're absolutely looking for, as it says here, freedom of movement and communication. And you have Aquarius rising, and your Saturn is so messed up that you can't get this freedom of communication, then what is the Mercury doing there? It's almost like you're looking at, how would you weigh this out? Well, this is a nice way to start looking at it from the perspective of, what am I trying to achieve here? What am I motivated from? And every time I start a new project, or I start with the principle of beginning something, whether it's through the perfected ascendant, or whether it's through, a new experience, or a new job, or a new relationship, or whatever is new or foreign to you, how are you going to get this motivation done? Is this going to work for you, and are you going to achieve these things? That's, I guess, what what Zoltan and what Rob Zoller was saying, and perhaps through the Marinus model, this is also something that's been coming through. So these are the four. These are virtually, through the elements, the four principles of how you go about getting primary motivation met. And we come back to the idea that there are masculine signs, there are feminine signs, and the masculine signs are going to have the quality of heat, and the feminine signs are going to have the quality of coldness. So you've got, really, if you break it down, the first breakdown is the gender of the signs. So all the fire signs and all the air signs are going to have this sort of sense of, they're going to use words like desire and drive and all those sorts of things, because in effect, if you have a fire ascendant or you have an air ascendant, then you are trying to take the very masculine sword and place it into the world and say, I am here. Notice me, pay attention to me. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to save the world. I'm going to infect the world, infect or affect the world, whatever you want to call it. This is this very masculine principle of making a difference. That's what the fire and the earth ascendants are going to try and do. And that's quite different from the feminine idea of the coldness of the earth and the water. If you have the whole idea, and this is, this is not meant to upset anybody who is, this is the difference of going back to the model that is very, very, very old, that talks about masculine being a hot quality and feminine being a cold quality. The whole idea of the first quality of whether it's a fire sign or an air sign is the idea that heat is worked very quickly, it is gathered very quickly, it's an energy that is used very, very quickly, and then it dissipates and is gone. These are your hunters running out to kill your animals, or to collect whatever it needs for the tribe, leaving behind the earth and water qualities, which are the more female, that says, what if he breaks his neck and he doesn't come home with the kill? What are we going to eat then? How are we going to survive? And that's what earth and water is about. It's about survival. Mm-hmm. It's about adapting. It's about while all these yang ascendants are going out changing the world, the earth and the water ascendants are saying, how are we going to survive? How are we going to adapt? How are we going to make this happen where we actually get our physical security met if it's an earth ascendant, and our emotional security met if it's a water ascendant, through the, the signs of either the water or the earth ascendants. Now, I have to get you up to date with Aristotle's four causes. I'm going to refer back to
Robert Hand. Oh, Rob Zoll. I thought you were going to refer to Robert Hand.
No. Did I do that then? Sorry, you're absolutely right. I've got Zola on the brain. You're absolutely right. Robert Hand. Yes. Because that's what it says up here. Sorry, Robert. Okay. This just takes a minute and it's not hard to understand. I'll work with this in there. The whole idea that Aristotle talks about is four causes, okay? You've got the material cause, okay? This is the first one. This is the material or the raw material that everything comes from. So if we were to, and the whole beauty of this is what they call an objective cause. So we can all agree pretty much across the board what the first house is, okay? We all, whether we are traditionalists, whether we are modern astrologers, whatever we are, we have this idea that we agree that a first house covers certain things. It signifies the body, the health, the world, the personality, the physical stuff, all the rest of it, okay? In other words, we have the whole idea of potential. So if I had a lump of clay, that would be my material cause. It would be the matter, okay? So that's what the first beginning is. Each of the houses are the material cause, whether they are the first house, whether they're the fifth, whatever they are. We agree the fifth is children, leisure, we agree the seventh is contract or partners, all the rest of it. In other words, that's our lump of clay. Now, we have 12 ways in which we can move to the efficient cause. Now, the efficient cause is who's going to change me? Who's going to start the process from material or matter to actually say, I am going to create something. I have a vision of this thing. I'm going to take this lump of clay, which is the first house, and I am going to, with my skills, I am going to have the vision and the capability and the plan to change it from the process of clay to something else. Normally it might be a sculptor, a potter, if I'm talking about clay, okay? This is my efficient cause. And the lovely thing about efficient is it tells you how efficient is this planet at taking this and making it happen, okay? And if you have a planet which is in poor condition, then its efficiency is very much compromised. A little bit like the difference between if I took that lump of clay and I gave it to a sculptor and I gave another clay to a child, I'm going to get, they're both going to have visions for what's going to be created, but their skill level is going to be different. A sculptor is going to have years of practice, and a child is going to have very little practice of what to do with this clay. All the vision in the world, but the capability is compromised. And that's the first statement about the ruler of the sign on the cusp. Make sense?
Yes. So, Joy, are you saying that the material cause would essentially be the sign itself on the cusp, and the efficient cause would be the planet that rules that sign?
Absolutely. Yes, yeah. The sign on the house will tell you, does this clay come from, I'm trying to think of where clay pits come from. Obviously, I'm not a sculptor. But yeah, like what is the quality? What is this, what does it smell? What does it taste like? What does it look like? Where does it come from? Absolutely, that's the sign. That's my first thing. This is the house and this is the sign. So if I had Gemini on this first house cusp, it would tell me what type of clay and what my potentials were to start with, what is the raw material. As soon as I find that Gemini on that first house cusp, then I'm going to have to look for Mercury, because Mercury is the one with the vision. Mercury is the one with the skill and the plan and the action, the efficiency, if you like, to do something with not the sign itself, but the house. It's almost like the sign. If you think of signs as being, it's actually 2 words that I use for sign. Think of them as signposts. That's all they are. You know, they just give you a direction of where to look. I'm not going to talk about the qualities of Gemini. All I'm going to talk about is the fact that I have Gemini, the sign of Gemini, the signpost of Gemini on the first house, which then leads me straight away to Mercury. The direct route is Gemini says, look here, this is the signpost, this is where I'm directing you. I'm directing you to Mercury. So I can talk about, you know, the qualities, and I can talk about, you know, the yin and the yang of Gemini, and that it's yang, and that it's, you know, elemental, it's air, etc., etc. But as a signpost, it points me straight to Mercury. And depending on what Mercury is doing in the chart, and I have, and this is why, you know, cookbook astrology doesn't work, Mychal, because for every Gemini rising, I have a Mercury in the potential of 12 signs. How can I possibly describe Gemini rising when I don't know where Mercury is in the chart? Because Mercury will tell me all about its efficient cause and its potential to do what it needs to do for the first house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've all met Gemini rising people that we can't get a peep out of. You know, you cannot expect a Gemini rising to be loquacious and eloquent and communicative and all these sorts of things just because they're Gemini rising. You know, if their Mercury is sitting in a horrible state, hampered by, you know, a planet that's absolutely squashing it, they're too frightened to speak out. You know, the communication is not something that's there. So for every sign, I have a potential and an efficient cause to be completely different according to where it sits in the chart, according to, you know, who its own dispositor is. I would definitely be, you know, there's almost needs to be another line out of here to say part of the efficient cause of this Mercury is going to be who disposits the sign of Mercury. So I'm going, you know, it's like a spider's web. The spider's in the center and the web is just going out and out and out and out. That's why astrology takes you so long to learn. Well, not simple, because you're not just looking at, I'm going to describe Gemini on the Ascendant and I'm going to get it right every time. You're not, unless you're watching for Mercury. Once the potter or the sculptor or whatever it is, the child or the sculptor takes the material of whatever it is, the first house, then I have to think about the formal cause, and the formal cause is down here. In other words, if we're talking about Gemini rising and we're talking about Mercury being the ruler of Gemini and how efficient it is and what vision does it have and by what means does it create the first house, then my next question is, what has Mercury turned it into? You know, what does Gemini ascendant or Gemini on the first house look like? What's its shape? What's its appearance? What's its essence? What's its form? What has it turned it into? Has it turned it into a loquacious, talkative Gemini rising, or has Mercury turned it into quietness, studiousness, shyness, fear, speaking out? What has Mercury turned the form into? That's important. I need to know what the shape and appearance and essence is. And in a way, I've now moved from the potential of the clay to the potential of who is the sculptor to the actual of what I've created. So the formal cause, if I use the analogy of clay, which is the material cause and which is the ascendant, and I look at the sculptor, which is the capacity of Mercury to do this thing, then what I've created, have I created a vase? Have I created a plate? Have I created a piece of beautiful work? You know, what have I turned the form into? It's very important that I know what that form becomes. Mercury, the ruler of whatever that sign is, will give me a formal cause. Because if I were talking about a different sign, say I was to say Scorpio, then Mars is going to use it differently. It's going to have a different vision, and it's going to look a Scorp rising is going to look very, very different in form and appearance and shape to what a Gemini rising looks like in the first house or on the sign of the first house. So this formal cause is very, very important as far as where have I started, the material cause, what have I done to it, the ruler of the house, and what does it look like, also the ruler of the house.
In terms of the formal cause, are you looking at, could we possibly put aspects that the ascendant ruler receives as being formative to how that ascendant ruler delivers on its promise? Or how would you grade in the aspects to the ascendant ruler into this equation of the four causes?
Mychal, absolutely, because it's going to matter if I find that Mercury, whatever its efficient cause is, and it's the ruler of Gemini, if I find that it then forms a square to Saturn, then absolutely I know it's going to change my shape and appearance of the ascendant, isn't it? It's going to have an effect. Saturn is going to quieten Mercury down, add the insecurities, and it's going to ultimately affect this Gemini in the first house. So yes, most definitely aspects are going to have to be taken into account to the ruler of that Gemini, which is Mercury. If it's Jupiter, then I'm going to get a different effect of form, aren't I? I'm going to get a different shape, appearance, form of what that ascendant is if it's Jupiter rather than Saturn that's making an aspect to that Mercury. Yeah, absolutely.
Now this goes back to Marinus for me, because in his system, there's the cosmic state of the planet, which is essentially the essential dignity of the planet. But then there's also the terrestrial state of the planet. What is happening to that planet by virtue of where it falls accidentally within the body of the chart? And I think that what you're doing here with the four causes is you're saying that a lot of the accidents that occurred to that planet, okay, Mercury is casting his Dexter square to Saturn, and therefore it qualifies the way how that Mercury manifests, and is also trining this Jupiter, so it also adds another flavor to that Mercury. I think what you're doing with these four causes is you're really fleshing out the accidents that occur to the planet that has rulership in the ascendant, which really qualifies the sort of ascendant you're going to interact with, and it really qualifies the sort of person who you're going to essentially meet when you face that person in the world, insofar as the ascendant is our interface between us and the world.
Absolutely. And as you say, I mean, okay, the fact that perhaps the Mercury is in some kind of debility is going to affect it. If it then forms an aspect to a malefic, then it's going to affect the formal cause. But also, and this comes into this idea of aversion that we're going to work in towards, is that the house placement of Mercury, if it is in a state of one of those dark houses in relationship to the ascendant by sign, then you are talking about accidental debility here, and you're talking about blindness, and you're talking about aversion, and that will definitely affect the shape and appearance and the formal cause. Absolutely, no doubt about it, Mychal. I want to get to the final cause, because yes, I love this part that Rob Hand talks about, where he says that science has severed us from our final cause. And that to astrology and to the ancients, this was perhaps as important or more important than these previous three. And the whole point of the final cause is actually a spiritual kind of idea. And it says almost like, what was I made for? What am I here for? What is my purpose? What is my reasoning? So if I take that formal cause, if I take my lump of clay and I give it to a sculptor and he makes a plate out of it, which is the formal cause, then my final cause is this plate is to eat from, okay? It nourishes me, it holds my food, it shares food around, it does both the practical form, and it also does, the kind of the connection of the metaphysical. But if I take this lump of clay and I give it to an artist sculptor, and the formal cause is this stirring, magnificent, beautiful image, then the final cause becomes, for everybody, is quite different. Everybody will look at this image and find something spiritual, precious, divine about it. And that's the final cause. And for astrology, this was for us, the final cause is this connection between a living universe and as above and a so below. And science came along and cut it and said, there is no final cause, there is no divine, there is no living being, there is no living universe. You just have to live with the whole idea. And this is why people get so stirred up about cause and effect, as you and I talk about, is the fact that it's not just a fact of this planet up there, it causes this, and this is the effect. This is not what we're talking about. This is not Aristotelian causes. It is the last one, the final cause of divinity, the last thing about why it was made, why is the reason of being, why does the universe move in the way it does, and why on some level am I affected. I don't know why by it, but astrology wouldn't work if we didn't believe in the final cause. And that is just, to me, the connector of the divine and the mundane. It's so beautiful. And that is the responsibility, by the way, of the ruling planet. If I have Gemini here, then it's Mercury's purpose to give me a reason for why I am here. Am I here for that whole idea? If I've got an air sign here and it's Gemini, is the final cause that I'm supposed to have freedom of movement and communication and all that primary motivation stuff. If instead the first house is still ruled by Mercury and I have Virgo instead and I've got an earth sign, is my final cause that I need to cement something here, that I need this physical security, that I need to build something that I will be remembered for? What is my final cause here? Mercury is responsible for giving it to me. Trouble is if I can't see the Lord, if there's a disconnect, if there's aversion between this guy here, which is my first house, and a broken communication to my ruler, then I struggle with what is my source, what is my plan, what is my vision, what is my form, I don't understand it, and why on earth do I exist? This is incredibly critical to Ascendant Lords. Okay, are you happy for me to move on?
I'm so happy.
Okay, this is a very boring table, okay, that shows you the 12 signs. So if I was to say, okay, and I do have this visually, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. If I have the 12 of the signs here, then the next one along, and this is all in a tiny universe's companion. All of these tables and how I get there and why I get there is explained in companion, okay? There's only one planet that's going to struggle when it's in Aries, and that's going to be Venus. I would have to have Taurus rising in order for Venus to be blind. That's a better way to say it, okay?
Yes.
So Venus in Aries is blind to a Taurus ascendant. If I have any 3 of these ascendants, Aries, then if I find that my ruling planet Mars is in Taurus, then I have blindness. If I have Gemini, and this is the example we just talked about, if I have a Gemini ascendant and Mercury is in Taurus, then I have blindness. If I have an ascendant of Sagittarius and Jupiter is in Taurus, then I have blindness and Jupiter can't get to Sagittarius. Right. So, okay, I'm going to leave this alone. It's on here. So, okay, so I looked at each of the signs and said, which planets have trouble with this sign? Okay, 3 of the planets have trouble with Taurus. 2 of the planets have trouble with Gemini. Venus and Mars in Gemini are going to struggle. 2 of the planets struggle in Cancer. If I have a Sun in Cancer, it's not going to see Leo. If I have Saturn in Cancer, it's not going to see Aquarius. So I've got all these possibilities here, okay?
What I find absolutely incredible about this list is that none of the planets that you have in this planets in aversion column actually have any of the major dignities in any of these signs.
Yeah. In fact, you see a bit of detriment here, don't you?
Yes.
You can see that if I put Mars in Taurus, it's going to go into detriment. Now, that's not going to be a problem for Scorpio because I can still see it by opposition, but it's definitely going to be a problem for the other sign of Mars, which is Aries. So it's not so much that if I put Mars in detriment in Taurus, I've got a problem with Scorpio. I don't, because I'm going to see it by opposition because it's in detriment. Mars is going to rule Scorpio on one side of the chart, and if I put Mars in Taurus on the other side of the chart, I may have a difficult relationship with it, but I have visual sight. It's all about, can I see you? Okay? But if I put Mars in Taurus, while it's busy dealing with its Scorpio house, it is completely blind to Aries. Absolutely. It's like a planet. When it rules a house, it's the governor of that house. It's the guardian. It's the one who is meant to be responsible for the affairs of that house. So the nature or the essential dignity of the governor, or the one who's the guardian, that's the dignity. So Mars in Taurus is not a particularly good guardian. It's a guardian in detriment. It's got its own interests at heart. It's got its own problems. So when it's supposed to look after Scorpio, it's not going to do a very good job. And what it's going to do also is when a planet's in detriment, it's going to accentuate the axis, because you're always going to have an opposition. So if I put Scorpio on the third house cusp, I know that I'm going to have Mars in Taurus in the ninth. So I've just accentuated that ninth third axis. I've just made a whole lot of trouble for it. The planet in that ninth house in detriment is going to stir up the ninth, but it's also going to be really difficult in being able to manage the affairs of the third house, let alone what Aries is doing in the chart. I talk about this aversion a little bit like what it feels like for a planet to be in aversion, okay? Every planet has the good intention of looking after its house, okay? Mars wants to look after the house of Scorpio, and it wants to look after the house of Aries. That's the contract that Mars has with these two signs. I am responsible for looking out for the house where Scorpio lies and the house where Aries lies. I take that on. I'm a god. I'm a planet. This is my role. I am the guardian, okay? So the intentions are good, but the ability to do it can be compromised, okay? So say, for instance, Mychal, okay? Say, for instance, I come to your house out of the blue with my little grandchild. Obviously, I'm too old to have a child now, but with my little grandchild, and I say to you, Mychal, I have to go off on an appointment. Can you look after this child for me? Okay? Now, your intention is to say, yeah, Joy, absolutely. I really want to do this favor for you. It's a great idea, okay? So I leave, happy that I think you're going to look after it. You're going to be the temporary guardian, okay? You look at this child and you go, what am I going to do with it? Okay. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this child. Okay. Now, the other thing is, you may have very little experience with children. I don't know if you have or you haven't. Okay. But the second thing is, I may have landed that child on your doorstep at the worst possible time. Okay. When you have your podcasts, you have lessons to make, you have an appointment with a student, you have a client coming up, whatever the conditions are, okay? So your intention is good, but your application is going to be poor. So you take this child and you think, children like snacks, they like television, and you sit that child on your couch and you turn on the TV and give it a plate of chips, and then you think, okay, dealt with that. I've been a guardian, okay? You go off and you lose sight of the child. No, you go into another space, you get preoccupied, you have your other issues to do, and you virtually go into aversion, okay? You go into a state of aversion. You go
Sounds about right.
Okay. Not because, you just can't see them, but your mind is preoccupied. Your mind is doing something else. So, an hour later, you look at your watch and you think, gee, Joy's due about now. And you go down to your lounge room and guess what? There's no child there. They've disappeared.
Wow.
How do you feel, Mychal? How do you feel?
Oh my God, I feel terrible, but it sounds like something I do.
I'm not saying you do that, but what you feel is fear and panic. Those are your two feelings. That's what a planet feels like. This blind fear of, oh my goodness, I have not attended to this situation. I have not looked after it. I have not done what I should have done. That's how a planet feels when it's in aversion, in the sign that is not compatible to its sign on a particular house. And so what you do, what tends to happen is you prevaricate, you go between ignoring the situation and thinking, I'll neglect that thing, it doesn't matter, it's not important to me, to waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, or for you maybe 10 a.m. in the morning, in a state of absolute panic and fear that you cannot deal with this situation. It is way beyond your capabilities. That's how every planet feels under their own abilities and their own significations and their own essences about being blind to their house. It's that big a deal.
Most definitely. I mean, trust me, this whole concept of planets being in aversion to their domiciles or planets being in aversion to the houses that they rule is something that I've brought full forcedly into my horary astrology. It's also something that I've brought fully into my natal astrology because it's a very powerful piece and also a very powerful disconnect between that planet and the things that that planet has rulership over, and it comes up within the life of that person. So when I'm doing horary astrology and the ruler of the first house is in aversion to the first house, that's already an indication, a very big, broad indication that the thing that this person is wanting has no power beneath it to actually manifest, because there's an internal disconnect between that person and themselves. If we choose to view the first house as also representing the person themselves, and even within natal astrology, I think that people who I've worked with who have had the ruler of the ascendant in aversion to the ascendant, there's always a fundamental piece of angst about who they know themselves to be and how they're coming across to the world. And sometimes the issue is that they don't even have a really clear concept of who it is they are, because they get so caught up within the environmental factors that they're dealing with that it doesn't really allow them to solidify a firm sense of their own identity. So, I mean, I think it really goes quite deep, this concept of aversion, and I'm really happy that you're bringing it up now.
Absolutely. It's it's really relevant. I'm going to do this again. This is better. These are taken straight out of the book, and this is sort of the beginning of the work. But just simply put, you can see that there are 4 signs that Saturn doesn't like, and you can see that 2 of them are detriment. And it's not the detriment between Leo and Aquarius. It's actually the problem of a Saturn in detriment, which can't see Capricorn, or a Saturn in Cancer, which can't see Aquarius. So you've got the whole idea of, if the primary motivation is this, especially when we talk about the first house, and I find, the planet that is supposed to deal with that primary motivation has not only the problem of detriment, but also is blind to the sign. So Capricorn, which is an Earth ascendant, then Saturn in Leo has very little capability to be able to see to the comfort of a Capricorn ascendant, or the safety or the sense of security that a Capricorn ascendant so desperately craves. And then you've got the whole issue of Saturn in Leo trying to bluff it out, That's, like, oh, it's all cool, I've got it under control, you don't have to worry about that, don't be having a go at me over that. That's Saturn in Leo. It has so many issues with that whole thing. So these are the different ones here that talk about, where the problems are and what they do. So, okay, from there, we're going to play chocolate wheels, Mychal. Pick a sign. This is what my friend and I, this is how we learned astrology. We played chocolate wheel astrology. We spun a wheel and we had to come up in 5 minutes to what it was, you know. It was fun, but I tell you what, it taught me really how to be fast on my astrology.
Okay, so let's
and sometimes there were even chocolates at the end of it. So give me a sign. Tell me a sign.
Let's go with Sagittarius.
Beautiful. Okay, so that's on page 9. I'll go 2 more pages.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll show you what happens for Sag rising, okay? Oh, I'll see, I'll go 1 more. Okay, so here's Sag rising here, okay? Now, this is what Paulus of Alexandrina talked about, okay? You can use Antitia and by the next progression, contra Antitia, to save yourself from aversion. In other words, if Sag has something, Sag has an Antitia relationship with Capricorn, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So even if Jupiter were to be in Capricorn, which of course would be in fall, it would still be able, and it would be in the 2nd house, because what you're going to find with this idea of aversion by whole sign is it's going to pick up, that's page 9, it's going to pick up these houses here, okay? So if the Lord of your ascendant is either in the 2nd sign from the ascendant, the 6th sign from the ascendant, the 8th sign from the ascendant, or the 12th sign from the ascendant, then you are going to have a potential, not always, but a potential for aversion. Okay? So not only are they dark houses where the Lord is, but they also have a possible potential for a blindness as well. So I'll go back there to Sag again to page 9. Let's put us back to 9 and put us back to Sag rising. And here we have it here, okay? So I could have potentially had a problem with the 2nd sign, which would have been Capricorn, the 6th sign, which is Taurus, the 8th sign, which is Cancer, or the 12th sign, which is Scorpio. Now, as you can see, there's an Antitia point. There is a correlation, a connectedness between, because of light, and also because of contra Antitia is the movement away from the Cancer Capricorn cusp, then I actually am saved because of Antitia and contra Antitia. So if Jupiter were to be in Capricorn, I would have the issues of it being in fall in the 2nd house, which might really mess with my finances, but it wouldn't mess with my primary motivation. And a fire primary motivation is about challenge and about action and about activity and about confidence and about engaging with the environment and with the world in a fiery kind of proactive capacity. Jupiter would in Capricorn would mess it up, and it might be a really poor guardian, but is not a blind guardian, if that makes sense. Same for Cancer. In fact, I don't mind Jupiter in Cancer because I've got an exalted Jupiter, and there's no problem with being able to achieve a relationship with Sagittarius, even though I've got the problem of Sag is a masculine sign and Cancer is feminine. It's a mutable sign and Cancer is cardinal. It's, you know, a hot, dry sign and Cancer is cold and wet. Contra Antitia saves my Jupiter and actually gives me quite a good guardian, by the way. So my resources in the 8th house, my joint resources, I'm going to be very good at going to the bank or going to a loan shark or going to all these, hopefully Jupiter in Cancer is reputable, you know, money sources, and they are going to help me get my actions and my primary motivation met. That's actually quite a good situation. The 8th house doesn't always have to be a bad house, especially if I can find something, especially if Jupiter and Cancer can repay the loan. That's the only problem. It may overextend itself. These guys in the 6th and the 12th house are big problems for Sag rising. If I find Jupiter is in Taurus, then I have a health issue here going on. This is the possible destruction of my physical strength in the 1st house. So my primary motivation, the ability to have action and strength and movement and challenge, is probably compromised in some way by this Jupiter in an earth sign of Taurus. This shows me a health state. that I'm going to have to watch, or an accident that I might have, or something that I overcommit myself in the 6th house and bogs me down because it's an earth sign for this Sag rising. And then I have the problem over here of the 12th house Jupiter in Scorpio, which is constantly my hidden enemies undermining me. And believe me, Jupiter means they are not exalted, I don't want to use exaltation, they are powerful. I do not want Jupiter in Scorpio wrecking my primary motivation here. And it's, you know, Jupiter will take on too many things. It will imprison itself in the 12th house. And it will mean that it will affect the 1st house. And I will have so much fear because of Jupiter in Scorpio that I will not be able to achieve as much as I would like from that Sag ascendant.
A question that I have, Joy, is in terms of Jupiter being in Cancer in the exact degree of its contrantitia to the ascendant, how would that affect the nature of the Jupiter ascendant relationship, especially when we take into consideration the fact that contrantitia was always seen as being somehow akin to an opposition? Wouldn't that create a difficulty in terms of the Jupiter ascendant relationship, or no?
Okay, 2 things that I would address there is, under Paulus's rule, this is way before we worked with degrees of antitia and contrantitia. So Jupiter could be in any degree
of Cancer.
Yep, and your ascendant could be in any degree of Sagittarius. So thank you for bringing that up. It's often something, because I think of antitia and signs, I forget that people are working with later authors who talk about, you know, the degree matching here. As far as the opposition is concerned, obviously, if I put Sag here, 8th house is not a great house, okay? It's not in opposition to Sag, but it shows you some of that contra-antitia problem. If I would be more inclined to look at what the term ruler was of your Jupiter and your ascendant to see who their term rulers were. That's, if I'm using degrees, I'm always using term rulers. And it brings in a really good point, thank you very much also for that, is that, okay, I might find that my ascendant is 24 degrees of Sag, okay? I've got no exalted ruler for Sag. I've only got my domicile ruler, which is Jupiter. Okay, so I can't use an exalted lord. What I might be able to do, however, is look at the degrees of 24 degrees of Sag. So you may be able, because the degrees, this is the only 2 things I will use degrees for. I will use the degrees of the ascendant, or I will use the degrees of the midheaven. Obviously, in a Placidus chart, I am not going to use the degrees of the 2nd house, 3rd house, 5th house, 6th house, okay? Because they change. They're going to change for your Regimontanus, they're going to change for our Cot, they're going to change for our Alcobitius. So the only 2 degrees that I'm going to use possible as a loophole is I'm going to use the degrees of the ascendant or the degrees of the midheaven if I'm looking at the midheaven lord. Yeah. So yes, if I looked at your chart and I found that Jupiter was either in Taurus or it was in Scorpio and it was 24 degrees, I would be looking to see if Saturn is in a sign that makes an aspect to Sagittarius. So I'm trying to find a lord of the ascendant. I really am. You know, but of course, you know, you've got the problems of only 7 signs, and in fact, only 6 signs are going to pick it up by exaltation. So you're going to have to use term rulers sometimes and at least look to see if your term ruler is going to pass over, you know, is going to step forward and become the guardian. Each one of these is going to have a different sign or a different capacity. So say, for instance, I was looking at Aries rising, okay? There's only one sign I'm nervous of for Mars, and that's Taurus, because Pisces is going to be contra-antitia. So any Mars in any degree of Pisces will still have 12th house problems. There's no going away from it, but it's not going to affect the aversion of the 1st house. It's going to put a spanner in the works for the primary motivation for Aries, but at least I have sight Mars in Pisces knows what's going on with an Aries rising. Now, Antisha is going to be the opposite sign of Pisces because they're always opposite signs. So there's an Antisha state between Virgo and Aries. Okay, again, Mars is not going to be great in the 6th house, but it's still capable of looking after the ascendant. And that means looking after, if I get an illness from my Mars in Virgo, then the ascendant, which rules my body, is going to say, how can we heal this body? Mars in the 6th is going to work out a way to heal the body. It might do it through the earthly things of, does it exercise? Is it food? Is it diet? You know, is it alternate therapies? You know, whatever Mars chooses, it will choose that in Virgo to heal the 1st house's physical body. Everything that the ascendant wants in primary motivation, in challenge, in achievement, in freedom of, you know, all those fire things, freedom of expression, all the things it can do, Mars in Virgo is going to work damn hard in the 6th house to achieve primary motivation. It will be a workhorse in the 6th house. And it will probably make the person sick, by the way, but it will still work towards the primary motivation. So it's still capable. It's not a fabulous, it's in a dark house, but it's not written off, as it would be if it was in detriment in the 2nd house. Now, this brings me to like and girdling, okay? Another Paulus principle, which, by the way, when I first read it and he talked about like and girdling, I thought, oh, is it one of those quirky little things that, you know, never makes it further? I was delighted when I found, even though Al-Biruni doesn't use the term, Al-Biruni definitely does use this idea of joint rulerships. So Mars rules both Scorpio and it rules Aries, okay? Now the idea of girdling is like a rope or a girdle or a sacred binding, okay? That's what a girdle means, you know? The girdle is very religious in Catholic principles. You know, the monk ties his girdle 3 times with 3 knots because they're the 3 knots of charity and chastity and I think there's poverty. That's the 3 knots of the monk. So the idea of engirdling is it says that Mars engirdles or collects 2 signs. It has Scorpio and it has Aries. If I find my Mars to be in rulership in Scorpio, then by the sign or the rule of engirdling, I can see Aries. So even though it's in the 8th house, if it's in rule, and this is another good thing to find Mars in rulership because their 2 signs are in conjunct, Venus in rulership because their 2 signs are in conjunct, and Saturn because it has consecutive signs. So like engirdling is good for 3 planets, Mars, Venus, and Saturn. Okay? So if I find Mars in rulership in the 8th house, I still have sight or I still have connectedness to the ascendant in Aries. If I turn it around and I put Libra on the ascendant, I do not want to find my Venus in Scorpio. Not only is it in detriment, but it also is blind to the 1st house. So Venus is so busy spending money inappropriately in all the wrong places and throwing money around and giving it to people they love and losing it and all the rest of it, that I actually don't get the ability to deal with my primary motivation. It's part of Venus's problem. Or I'm so frightened, and this is Venus in detriment, I'm so frightened that people won't love me, they won't accept me, you know, they won't care for me, that they will betray me, that they will do all these horrible Mars things to me, Scorpio, that I actually can't speak out. I can't communicate. I can't give my ideas freely. I can't give them with love and freedom. Venus in Scorpio has a capacity, because it's in detriment and it's in a sign, it's disposited by Mars. So it's incredibly suspicious. It's sometimes fearful of women. It has dramas with social connections, with social acceptability. My primary motivation for Libra, because it's an air sign. Remember we went back and we talked about primary motivation? I'm trying to find, page 3, okay? So if I can go back to page 3 really quickly, here it is here. So the individual with an air ascendant is motivated by the drive for freedom of movement and communication, okay? So each of the air signs will do it separately and differently, okay? Libra is cardinal, so it's going to instigate, and it's ruled by Venus. So when Libra is trying to get freedom of movement and communication, it's doing it one-to-one. Okay, it's not trying to impress a room full of people. It's not trying to communicate, you know, with a band or in several different ways. Libra and Ascendant is saying, you and me are having this conversation. I want my ideas to influence you. That's Libra and Ascendant. Okay, if my Venus is in Scorpio, then I'm frightened of what you think of my opinions. I'm frightened that if I communicate with you, you're going to take me down, or I'm going to give you a piece of information that you are going to use against me later. So it clamps Libra and Ascendant shut. It shuts its mouth, okay? And it's only when, if I go down to, where am I, page 7, it only occurs when I have Ascendant in Libra and I have Mars in Scorpio. These are my fears of Venus affecting my primary motivation. That's what's happening here. This is Leo rising. This is like, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, but Antitia and Contra Antitia does not save the fixed signs. It doesn't give them anything extra, because in the cases of Contra and Contra Antitia, the fixed signs just form an aspect to each other. So you don't get any blessings or any benefits or any extra, you know, exclusion from aversion for the fixed signs. And that's why they're always going to be a bit of a problem, okay? Mm-hmm. So when I look at Leo rising, and I know the moderns are going to say Leo rising is, you know, about expressing itself and about wanting attention and, you know, all the things of being warm and generous and all the things that you expect from a Leo rising. Not when you have 4 of the feminine signs. These are really, really difficult. The Sun in Virgo, the Sun opposite in Pisces, the Sun in Capricorn, and the Sun in Cancer. This is showing you, if I had light from the Ascendant, these are all the dark places. And you can't get away from them when you have Leo rising and you have a Sun in the potential of 1 of 6 of the female signs. The 2 exceptions, of course, are Taurus, because I have a square. If I have the Sun in Taurus, I can see Leo. If I have the Sun in Scorpio, I can see Leo. But I cannot see it if my Sun is in Virgo. I cannot see it if my Sun is in Capricorn. Nor can I see it if my Sun is in Pisces. Nor can I see it if my Sun is in Cancer. This is part of the difficulty of these 4 potentially signs. And each one of them will panic about the Ascendant in a different way. Okay? A Sun in Virgo will panic about, I can't get it right. I get criticized. It's a Mercury problem, because Mercury is ultimately the dispositor of Virgo. So everything, I make lists, I try to do all these things, and it falls apart. That is the Sun in Virgo. And it destroys my confidence in the Leo rising. And what you'll find, Leo rising with the Sun in Virgo, will be, you'll get the feeling of Leo rising, but all this criticism and all this nagging behind it. And all this reasoning behind why I can't do things. That leads to a little bit of a, you know, like this sense of Leo rising being either excessively humble, which is a Virgo way to do it, Virgo Sun way to do it, or excessively judgmental of the world, you know, and also a tinge of bitterness about why things have gone wrong for them. That's Virgo. Capricorn Sun with Leo rising is that whole sense of accentuation, not just of 6th house issues of health and 6th house that we understand it, but it's also the issues of why I feel like I fail in life. On that very, very basic level of why I can't possibly meet the expectations of firstly my father and then everybody else. And so every time the Leo rising says, I've done this, or I've done that, or I can brag about this, or I can say this is done, then the Capricorn sun knows that someone will shoot it down and say, what's your authority? You know, why are you defensive? Why do you have to be this way? Why do you feel you have to draw attention to yourself? And the Capricorn sun feels crushed, Mychal, absolutely crushed. Pisces sun. Normally, Pisces is a sign of Jupiter, which it remains to be. Leo rising with the Pisces sun has this level of timidity. There's a timidness about going out and showing yourself. There's a sense of, I have so many journeys to make and so many things to do. I think in the first one, when I wrote The Tiny Universe, I talked about Pisces sun being the traveller in the trilogy of, not War of the Worlds, I get them mixed up, you know, the Hobbit series.
The Lord of the Rings, and I think you're speaking about, it's not Frodo, and it's not Samwise.
No, it's actually a human. It's a human that they meet in the tavern. Those people who know it. And there's the one who journeys far and loses his kingdom and then has to fight back for it. That's very much the story of a Pisces sun with Leo rising. All these quests he goes on, and each one he's invisible and he can't get it, you know, and he's not acknowledged by his father, and all these sorts of things that he goes on is very much the story of a Pisces sun with Leo rising. And also the other thing about Pisces sun ruling a Leo rising is it gets disillusioned with the quest. You know, it kind of goes, I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore. So it abandons the quest, and that then affects the Leo rising. And the last one is the Cancer sun that lies in the 12th house. You know, Cancer sun can snuggle quite comfortably in the 12th house, you know. It's not particularly, it can give all its nurturing, it can deal with what I call the shadows of society, you know, all the things that we fear, all the minority groups, all the, you know, humanitarian things, all the, you know, all the issues, all the marches, all the rest of it are very much the 12th house. What does society fear and then try to contain and imprison? That's 12th house. The sun in Cancer has the ability to be a fabulous nurturer there. But what they fear is having to stand out on their principles in the first house. Because they can't see the first house, if they stand out, they're a little bit like the gunman in, you know, OK Corral, you know, the whole town's behind me till I have to stand in front of me. And all of a sudden everybody disappears and I'm all alone again. You know? That's what the Cancer fears in the 12th house, that no one will back it up. So each one of these has their own dilemma, okay? I won't go into detail, but for Aquarius rising, then obviously Saturn in Pisces is 1 house away, Saturn in Cancer is 6 signs away, and Saturn in Virgo is 8 signs away. This is the idea of like and girdling. If Saturn is in rulership in Capricorn in the 12th house, then it manages both the 12th house and it sees the first house as well. Okay? Very strong campaigner for the rights of others. Often if you see Saturn in Capricorn, if they have worked through their issues and all the rest of it, and they've gone through their rebellions and, you know, challenged authorities and all the system and all the rest of it, then they can become a wonderful spokesman for the 12th house person who's disenfranchised in some way. Okay, very, very quickly, because there's a couple of pages I want to show at the end. There's Sag, there's Gemini. Gemini, if I put Mercury in Scorpio, it's going to be a problem. If I put Mercury in Taurus, again, 6th and 12th house axis, but Anticia and contra Anticia saves Gemini. If Mercury is in Cancer, it's okay, and if Mercury is in Capricorn, it's okay too. It's only going to be Taurus and Scorpio axis that I've got a problem with it. Capricorn, like and girdling again comes in. If Saturn's in rulership in Aquarius, it's going to look after Capricorn ascendant. Anticia's going to save Saturn in Sagittarius, and also contra Anticia's going to save Saturn in Gemini. But I do have a problem. You know, we looked at the first one and we said, gee whiz, what happens when Saturn's in Leo and it can't see Capricorn? This is what I was talking about. This is the visual. This is virtually what it looks like in a chart. And that's why I wanted to make sure I showed you the visuals, okay? Cancer, the moon has problems with Leo and it has problems with Aquarius. There is an antitia between Cancer and Gemini, so the moon in Gemini fully covers a Cancer rising. The moon in Sagittarius is fine. It has 6th house problems, but it can still get across and see Cancer rising. Okay? Taurus, 3 problems. If I find Venus is in either Gemini or it's in Aries or it's in Sagittarius, I'm going to have a problem with Taurus rising. Like in girdling, if I've put Venus in its rulership sign of Libra, I have the fact that Venus girdles Taurus and collects it and gives sight between Libra and Taurus, so it's okay. Scorpio, same thing. I've got Mars again, but like in girdling is this Aries concept. So if I have Scorpio rising, I have 6th house problems for a Mars in rulership, but I do have sight between them. Again, because Scorpio is a fixed sign, Antitia doesn't help it and contra Antitia doesn't help it. So if I find Mars in Sag or the opposite sign of Gemini, then I have no sight. If I have Sag in, okay, my brain's getting tired now. If I have Mars in Libra, it's in detriment and it's blind to Scorp rising. Remember that Scorp rising is looking for emotional security. So if I put poor old Mars in Libra, which again is trying to be sociable, it's almost like a double bind, isn't it? You know, like no matter what Mars socially tries to do with Libra, it's going to mess up my emotional security. And what Mars in Libra will do is it sits on the fence. It won't jump one way or the other. It won't motivate itself. It's frightened to, upset people. It's lazy, emotionally lazy, it's physically lazy. Sorry, I'm also referring to myself here, so I'm not saying all you out there with Mars in Libra. I know what it's like. It doesn't like discomfort. It doesn't like physical dirtiness. It wants to sit on the couch all day and eat chocolate. That's what it wants to do. And it can't see Scorpio. That's its problem. So Scorpio rising becomes very suspicious, very hard to break the shell of a Scorpio rising if it has Mars in Libra. Absolutely. The self-protective model is very, very strong for this Scorpio rising. And the last one here that I listed is the Virgo and Pisces. So if you're looking at this, you can see that Mercury can be in any of the signs except Aquarius or Leo. Again, there's no debility for Mercury in Aquarius or Mercury in Leo, but there's lack of sight. Mercury in the 6th house can't see Virgo. Mercury in the 12th house in Leo cannot see Virgo. You're looking for physical security when you're looking for Virgo rising. And Mercury, when it's in this fixed Saturn sign, just goes over and over and over and over again what it needs to be physically safe, and gets itself in a terrible bind and often causes mental and nervous exhaustion over here in the 6th house. And of course, I did in Companion, and I'm not trying to keep referring to it, but I looked at the chart. One of my most beloved charts is the chart of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the author of The Little Prince. I don't know if you know The Little Prince.
I know The Little Prince.
Michael. Oh, the most profound, beautiful, emotional, sad, happy, gorgeous, gut-wrenching. You can read if you haven't read it before, you can read The Little Prince in an afternoon, and believe me, it'll take a lifetime to unravel it. Wow. Absolutely amazing. And it's my dedication is the little rose here, is the rose in The Little Prince on Companion. And I looked at Antonio de Saint-Exupéry's chart, and he has Virgo rising, or he was born in 1900. He had Virgo rising with this Mercury in Leo. And he talks about how, He is the little prince. He is the Mercury in Leo, you know. He wants all the accolades, but he just can't get them. And he has to come from a little asteroid planet where he's the king to Earth where he has no dominion, he has no authority, he has no, you know, and he's just, you read The Little Prince and you are witnessing his Mercury in Leo. And it's brilliant and it's beautiful and it'll break your heart. You know, buy it, get it. It's usually on my desk, but it's not here at the moment. The Little Prince, beautiful book. And this is what he had. And the last one is Pisces. If you have Pisces rising, you probably don't want to find Jupiter in Leo or Jupiter in Aquarius, because they are going to be blind to Pisces rising. Again, Pisces is a water sign. It's looking for emotional connection. Jupiter in Aquarius is frightened of all its powerful enemies and therefore fears getting emotional support. Jupiter in Leo is often too arrogant, too vain, too too caught up in its own glories in the 6th house to see to emotional things. So any kind of hits to the emotional security or the prime motivation is Jupiter's going to hide itself here in the 6th house, or it's going to retreat back to the 12th house if it's in Aquarius. And again, Contra, Antitia and Antitia save the signs of Jupiter in Libra or Jupiter in Aries. Okay, this is a quick summary of the Ascendant and Aversion. These are things that people have said to me, okay, when we work through them. I do remember someone having a Sag rising and having a Jupiter in either Aquarius or Leo and saying she walks along the street and people push her out of the way. It's like I am not even there. They don't even see me. And I think, that's really hard for Jupiter in Leo or Jupiter in Aquarius to get themselves out there. But yeah, so they talk to me about feeling like they're invisible or ignored or passed over in the world. Often there's a fear of actually going into the world, or there's two things. That first thing I said is, what does the world want from me and what do I want from the world? This comes into the whole idea of aversion. The fear of exposure is the world wants too much from me and I can't give it to them. And the fear of the disregard of personal safety is the lack of awareness that you actually have a physical body. Mychal, I think you talked on this.
Yes.
You referred to this, that you've looked at clients who've had this, where the Lord of the Ascendant is in aversion, and they just don't know what to do with the body, and they don't know how to keep it safe.
Precisely.
They're often real risk takers with their bodies. They'll put their bodies in the wrong places at the wrong time, and then be absolutely staggered when they don't see it coming. Lack of awareness of the physical world, searching for meaning or comfort, always having this sense of dissatisfaction with what I'm supposed to be doing, where am I supposed to be doing. And again, all these things that we talked about, with this idea of the causes, the 4 causes. We have the material cause of the first house, but we have the ruler asking, who am I? Why do I exist? What's my purpose? Because the ruler can't see the first house. This is a really big thing to talk to clients about, or to recognize if you have this, that we're all doing, your ruling planet is doing the best it can. It's trying to guard the house, but it may not have the capacity to do it. It may not have the, if I go back, it may not have the efficient cause to do it. It may not be able to give form, and it certainly doesn't know what the final cause is, which is, what is the purpose of my life? I don't get it. That's what the ruling planet says. So all of these points here, I'll leave it up so you can see it. Dissatisfaction, disconnectedness. Oh, this is a good one. This often happens, where people talk to me about where they are misunderstood. People think they are this sort of person, but they're quite different. And even actually being accused of having a false identity or trying to fool people that they're one thing when they're not.
Yes.
If you don't have the awareness of what your ruler is trying to do, how can you possibly present a first house personality? How can you be true to those traits if your ruling planet is out to lunch in a really big way? insecurities. Mysterious, sudden, or unexplained physical ailments can come from aversion, especially if the ruler is in the 6th house. And even the 12th house, because the 12th house is hospitalization or infirmary or removal from society, from the 12th house, imprisonment of a hospital, all those sorts of things. Again, I've talked about primary motivation through the action of the ascendant's ruler. Constant frustration or feeling blindsided by the issues described by the house where the ascendant's ruling planet is placed. And you saw that with the 2nd, the 6th, the 8th, and the 12th house. Very last thing I've got is each planet reacts differently to being the planet which is in aversion. So if you have any of these guys, as well as, say for instance, Saturn is the ruler of the ascendant and it has its problems in any of these signs of Cancer, Leo, Virgo, or Pisces. Again, I would look at the dispositor, but I know in general these are the things that people are going to talk to me about if they have Saturn in these signs. And if I've got either Capricorn, which is blind, I think we said, to Saturn in Leo in detriment, or if I have Aquarius, which is blind to Saturn in Cancer, or Virgo, or Pisces, then this is how Saturn is going to react to being the blind planet. It's a little bit like me coming and picking up that child, that non-existent child from your place, Mychal, and if Saturn, you're taking the Saturn role, then you are going to react like this to me when I say, well, where is the child? By the way, the end of the story is happy and you find them hiding in a cupboard somewhere, okay? So don't worry about the child. But depending on who the ruling planet is you're going to react to my question of where is the child or where is the house in this particular way. And this is the list of the planets reacting in this way. And on that note, that's me finished. Any questions? 1,000 questions or just one?
Joy, it's even more mind-blowing to see it laid out in such an elegant way in which you've gone through the work in order to put this information together, because a lot of what you've put together are things that I think we eventually circuitously come to within our practice of astrology. And you see enough clients, you read enough charts, and you kind of come to the same conclusion. But it's wonderful to see it laid out fully, because I had never seen it in that manner. So thank you so much for doing the work.
This is me being the blacksmith, Mychal. This is me being the blacksmith. Tap, 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 tap. That's all I'm doing. All I'm doing. That's a reference to part 1. Sorry, everybody was coming in.
Yeah, everybody go and watch part 1.
No, that's boring. This is much more interesting.
Joy, this was such a pleasure to come and share this space with you. And I'm so happy. And once again, Joy, please tell our viewers and listeners where they can get in contact with you.
Look, go through, have a look. I'd love people to have a look at the Fedaria diaries and to relate it to their own lives. And that's on the website, a tinyuniverse-Joy Usher, I think .com. So that's where you would find me. There is an email connection there that you can leave a connection with. So that's probably the best way, to do it, is to go through the website, because then you've got an idea. The books, if you're interested in the books, they're available on the website through connection. And, buy them in the medium. I need a physical book. That's, me. I need to hold and play with it and write all over it. But as you said before, Mychal, they're $4.99 or $5 on ebook. Please buy them and have a look. Not because, I'm going to get any money out of it, but, hopefully you're going to find something useful there. The whole idea is us blacksmiths have to keep producing. That's what we do.
Absolutely.
A lot of horses out there, Mychal. This is going to sound really weird.
We work tirelessly for bringing excellence out into the world through astrology. And we give and we give and we give because the world needs this information, and there are more horses than there are blacksmiths.
I know, if they didn't have 4 damn feet, we'd be better off. And Michael, I just want to finish with, I believe you never master astrology. You always stay its servant.
Yes.
This is something we serve, and we serve hopefully without ego, without prejudice, without an agenda. We are, to me, anybody who works as an astrologer has already got their brownie points. We found this thing in a divine thing in a human life is just the gift of a lifetime. Be generous with your information, be generous with your knowledge. Everybody has to keep sharing. Whatever choice and pathway they choose in astrology, don't stop. Don't be disheartened by the naysayers or the ones who, laugh at you, or, ignore them. They don't matter.
There is an astrologer, her name is Lisa Scheim. She comes on Chris Brennan's podcast a lot, and she's his partner. And at UAC, the United Astrology Conference in Chicago in 2018, she got on stage and she said, we're here honoring all of the astrologers who are on the stage with me today, but I also want to honor all of those astrologers who are in their bedrooms, reading their books, pouring away and chiseling away at their craft of astrology, because those are the astrologers that change the world. And when I heard that, it really struck a deep chord within me, because for my entire childhood, I was that astrologer in my bedroom, chiseling away, poring over my books, and trying to become the best astrologer I could be. And so I think that there's a lot of people who are out there doing the work. We don't know them. We don't see them. But I think that we should definitely acknowledge them as well, because we all contribute to this wonderful thing that we love so dearly, which is this astrology. And it's up to us to not only do the work in the dark, but eventually come out into the world and share the fruits of our labor with the wider astrological community. And I see you doing that, and I applaud you, and I salute you, and I say thank you, Joy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Michael. My 3 things: be kind, be loving, and be a good astrologer. Bless you.
That sounds like a wonderful life. Joy Usher, it was an absolute pleasure having you with me for these many hours on the True Divination podcast. It is now 6:10 a.m. in the Bahamas, and I'm going to cancel all of my meetings.
Oh, my Saturn feels so guilty. Not really.
Well, Joy, I'm so happy to have spent this time with you. Thank you so much, and it means the world to me.
It's lovely to see your generation taking this on, Michael. I am so pleased. There's a couple of Reddit sites that I watch, and, and it's the youth. They're so tuned in and they're so connected. And what they say about traditional principles and where they're discussing a chart, I get so excited hearing them talk, because I think you are miles ahead already. You are going to be the ones who we are going to put this on your shoulders, but you're going to carry it. And that's wonderful. It's brilliant.
Thank you. And to our listeners and our viewers out there, I just want to keep holding you in a space of love and pouring love on you and telling you thank you for your support of the Oraculos True Divination podcast. I see your comments, I get your messages, I see your likes, I see how often you share the videos, and it truly means so much to me from the bottom of my heart that so many of you have chosen to join what is still a project in its infancy and help me to share the word about what it is we're doing over here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast. So please do subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. Please hit the bell down below so that you get the notifications, and please continue to join me on this epic journey of building magic and momentum right here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast. Until next time, I love you. Be well, be safe, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye, Michael.
Joy Usher.
That was fantastic. That was so much fun, Michael. You were very patient with me.